That's right, you read the title correctly. The Declaration of Independence is the first anarchistic document. What's good, y'all? You Dub back here again here in 2022. Let's get it. You know, I already know that I'm going to get some vehement pushback, some people foundationally, fundamentally to their core, especially if they're American patriots, will, a lot of them will have a hell of a lot to say just on that initial reaction. Pump the brakes. Now, those of you who are reasonable, those of you who utilize critical thinking, who are logically and rationally inclined, you're not going to have that. You're going to be willing to listen to what I have to say. In fact, it actually will go in lockstep with many of your American values. Um, Especially if you go all the way back and you're the type that's be like 1776 and are not just in lockstep with the state. Now, this vid, I almost recorded it a few times over this past week. It organically came up, and it just so happened to be 4th of July was right around the corner. I was like, oh, it makes sense that, subconsciously my mind's kind of telling me things. I think about things from time to time. And, I think about the Declaration of Independence uh, at various times throughout the year for a variety of reasons. It's actually one of the documents that, on a personal level, it's one of the reasons why I acknowledged that I was an anarchist back in 2012. So it's been decades since I've openly said that I was. And the first three arguments, really, against the premise of it being an anarchist document, is that it is, number one, is for the establishment of a separate nation, right? The establishment of a separate nation that involves government. Okay. Number two, that it's only speaking about one nation separating from another. Okay. So you have government, then one nation separating from another. Number three, it's a list because of the list of grievances. Now, I'll address each of those arguments before I go in depth as to why it is an anarchist document. Number one, the point about it being with, oh, but it focuses on a government. There's discussions and debates I've had throughout the years that some people say that governments that they just have to happen. Like if you have any form of collective, you say rule or any form of collective just governance, any form of collective, you know, overarching society that a government is what is. I'm not going to debate on the nuance and the semantics. Let's just be it known. As an anarchist, pretty much no state. Now, if you want to just call the structure that arises government, I'm not going to fight you over it because it's irrelevant to me. The point being that as an anarchist, no big brother, you know, national borders, like I get them, but they, especially borders of nation states, they're inorganic, unnatural, and artificial. Okay. More or less, it's saying that, and I've said this, each community should decide for itself. So if you're saying that a community or a region becomes a confederacy, it dictates its own, and within it, its laws or its rules, I should say, because I'm anti-law because laws become whimsical. But the rules, the structures, the various regulations that it comes up with, you want us to call that a government? I'm not going to fight you over it. Even though there are certain ones that'll be much broader, uh, a lot less populated and more. But if you want to call that a government, fine. Just like how, and we'll get into later about the Articles of Confederacy and the debate and the Constitutional Convention. But if your point that the Declaration of Independence, or it says, well, it talks about the necessity of a government and how governments are supposed to protect, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that's all great and dandy, and I'll break that down as to later as to why it also explains the reasons for anarchism. But being that it talks about governments, understand that what the founding fathers were doing in the Enlightenment era and their ideas. Understand this: the American experiment is a Freemason experiment. Okay, you have to understand it from that perspective. You have to understand that they were trying to establish an entirely new form of government, an entirely new form of republic, an entirely new system in of itself. And it was different from monarchies of old. They were trying to break away from monarchy, right? It was different from oligarchies. It was different from democracy, quote unquote. If you go back to ancient Athens, you'll understand what I mean by that one. It was different from a Swiss type of potential republic. It was different from the parliamentary system with the lords and all that foolishness going on with Britain and otherwise that would arise. Excuse me. So what they were attempting, again, the federalist kind of republic kind of aspect that encapsulated later was later. That was not the original intent. We have to go back to the original intent. You have to go back to what the original structure was. Okay, so this notion that, well, they weren't doing anything that had been done before. They were crafting an entire new, pioneering an entirely new. So complete anarchism wasn't even in the conception in that era. What we consider anarchism, the modern version anyway, because the concept actually goes back to ancient Greek. A meaning not or without or no, and anarchism, it says pretty much no rulers is what anarchism comes from. You look at the Declaration of Independence, it's indicating the no ruler aspect. Okay, and so they were branching away. Now you can say predecessors in a lot of ways to modern anarchism were the Golden Age, pirates in the Caribbean, for a variety of reasons I can get into within another video and more than likely shall. So that whole point of it, well, it just talking about government, they weren't thinking about, completely breaking away from what they knew. They were trying to establish a better system. And if you understand the roots of anarchism, that's really what anarchism is about, honestly. So it was more in a still traditional sense, but it was still revolutionary in its effect. And usually, when you have a prototype or the predecessor towards how things develop, that's kind of how things are. Things must start rudimentary. You cannot get into some crazy thing. Also, you had millions of people at that time. So you couldn't have done it completely from an anarchist position because you already had so many times. You already had establishments in a lot of different ways. You just can't. From a functionality standpoint, it couldn't have been what anarchists would envision. It just would have been impossible. It's the same thing of how Karl Marx, when he was talking in his Communist Manifesto, was talking about a transitionary period, because you have to understand 19th century thinking. We have to understand where they were coming from. So that's point number one. We'll come back to the second point about the nations breaking away, and we'll go to the third point of the thing with grievances. Here's the thing why that's not a legitimate argument. If you're saying that, well, they were just listing out, you notice how that was after they already talked about entire ideologies on how things should get down. If it was just about the list of grievances, they would have just pinned a list of grievances. The thing is, they had been doing that for a decade. Ben Franklin and Moore had been petitioning Parliament. Patrick Henry, if you famous speech, and on my personal Facebook, had shared it. Right, the "Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death" back in 1775. He was talking about this. He's like, listen, we've already done this pony dance. All right, we've already gone through the kangaroo courts. That shit don't work. That just does not work. So I'm not talking out of my ass. Look at the context of what was being discussed in 1775, what led up to 1776. So things had been going on. The revolution had been going on for over a year, which eventually goes into a war. But it was still the revolutionary period. So you're going to have radical ideas. It wasn't just this wholehearted list of grievances of why they need to be nation. No, they needed to form their own out of necessity. And that's usually what comes about, right? They even talked about it. Like, it is not easy for people to break away from what they know. It's more or less the gist of one part of the Declaration of Independence, right? And we'll talk more in this in a bit. But understand that just saying that was a list of grievances against the crown does not invalidate what I'm saying. In fact, it validates what I'm saying, because anarchists typically has a list of grievances, even more intense than what they did back then and what they were going through. Because we sure enough got a list of grievances. You talking about the United States. We sure enough got a list of grievances way longer and way more intense than what the founding fathers had to deal with. They would agree with me fundamentally on that one. Now, to the second point about breaking away with nationhood. Well, do you understand what a nation is? Okay, first and foremost, you're talking about a group of people. This notion of, well, you're just breaking away and to do what? To do what? You got to have a structure. Because a lot of people talk about, they have this fantasy of, well, doing things my way. Yeah, but they don't do it, or things fail. Why? Because in order to have a foundation of a new nation, there are certain things you got to go through, whether it be militaristically, you got to found a new economy. You have to form the political structure. You have to form the social structure. You have to figure out how your society is going to function. Those are literally things anarchists talk about all the time. Normally, what happens is you have coups d'etats, you have juntas, you have overthrows of a regime, but then you have a replacement regime. Look at the hijacking of the Russian Revolution, anybody? Look what happened with the French Revolution, anybody? So not too much changes. Things change, but not too much changes. And the American Revolution was successful because you had men who were capable and competent, who were also thinkers. They were coming in with their ideas, and those same men were implanting those various ideas. It wasn't just a grab for power. Look at the various Mexican revolutions and the various revolutions in South America and in various Asian nations. It's literally entire ideologies being implanted. And that's why the American Revolution is different from every other revolution in modern times and really in world history. And I'm not putting it on a pedestal, but when you are the cream of the crop, like Macho Man Randy Savage would say, you deserve a place of recognition. That's why everybody else were trying to model after that. Even if they weren't trying to say it, they were. When you look at every other revolution, in some ways it was impacted or modeled after the American Revolution, except just not done as well. Because they did not have the foresight and the forethought that went into it. Now, here's why it's an anarchist. Let's go through the gist of the beginnings of the document. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Now I'll stop right there. There's a video that I've been thinking about for years of eventually breaking down the Declaration of Independence with war, but we'll address things here. When in the course of human events, okay, when in human history, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them. Pretty much, when in human history, it becomes necessary, it is required that one people become independent from another. Meaning that this isn't just something that happens no, it needs to occur. It's natural for it to occur. To dissolve the political bands from another. To literally no longer be associated on that level with another. Sure, you might have certain economic ties, but y'all just not fucking with them. Y'all are just not on the dealings with them. Dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth, to become recognized amongst the other nations, amongst the other, entities that are recognized on the planet, a separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. To become completely independent as a people. It's what it's talking about. To have liberty, libertad. Nature's God entitled them. So this is literally getting into, you could say that many were deists, but this is getting to the notion that This is divinely ordained, which goes in completely opposition to Thomas Hobbes, the state of nature. It goes completely in opposition to the divine ordinance of kings and things of that nature, which is just complete foolishness. Foolishness, bullshit. If you understand that document or what's written about it, it makes no sense. The divine right of kings, it makes absolutely no real justification. Versus this is saying that no, this is really the Almighty, right? God Almighty is literally, this is how he meant it to be, that people would be in their own places, whether you go from a tribal standpoint, whether you go a clan standpoint, whether you just go people living in different pockets of the world. And I mean, if you go from Christian standpoint, if you go to the book of Genesis, you can go that be fruitful and multiply, subdue the earth, pretty much spread out, as opposed to the Tower of Babel, right? Tower of Babel. If you go back to Genesis chapter 11, where you had a lot of issues going in there, including an over concentration of people. So people are supposed to just be free to go. It's the same thing as children breaking away from the nest of the parent, going out and being on your own eventually. Doesn't mean that generations can't live amongst, but you're supposed to have that separation standpoint. Okay. Which you got entitled, A Decent Respect to the Opinions of Mankind Requires that they should declare the causes which impelled them to separation. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind. So we aren't just doing something willy-nilly. We're not just doing something impulsive or haphazard because we're just dissatisfied and disgruntled. No. We are respecting your intellect, respecting you as a person. Requires that they should declare the causes. Requires that we should state the reasons as to why we are separating. That why we need to separate. That this isn't a childish utopic fantasy. No, this is a very real thing that we need to do. And here are our reasons. Now, that whole thing, that's just the first paragraph. That in of itself literally is anarchistic thought to a T. That entire paragraph, when you talk to any anarchist who's knowledgeable, and that's the thing about anarchism, you have to be an anarchist, a true anarchist, not this, I think, this is cool. No, an actual anarchist must be intelligent, must be knowledgeable, must be educated on political matters and social matters, potentially economic matters. May not have all the answers, but you on that journey, you have to, because you're dealing to the very nature of society itself and the function and the structure of society. That's why there's so many debates and whatnot, because you have different ideas. Okay, how are we going to do this thing, right? This thing of ours, if you get the mob reference, with Cosa Nostra. So you had that. Then we go into the second paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now let's break this down. We hold these truths. Truths, as I often say, first of all, there's no my truth. I hate the term my truth. There's no my truth. Truth is objectivity. It must be based on objectives. Truth deals with a standard. Truth is based on absolutes and universals. And that's just the reality. Because without that, you have no truth. We hold these truths to be self-evident, meaning it is obvious. It is aware to anyone bothers to look, that all men are created equal. Now, this is a key point, because a lot of people go, well, there were slave owners. They still had the ideas. They understood. Just because something was, and I'm not, just pushing slavery underneath the rug. First of all, it wasn't the same type of slavery that became later. But I'm not pushing slavery underneath the rug. What I'm saying is these were the debates at the time. And if you look what happened in 1808 with even the British Empire, where it was the abolition of slavery. Without the greed of man, without a number of things, the evils that men do, you cannot justify it. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Equality. What is equality? Equality is not sameness. It's not uniformity. It's not everybody falls lock in step. No, it's at the baseline, we're all human. We all bleed red. We're all men. We're all mankind. Men and women. All men are created equal. Period. That is the statement of an anarchist. That they are endowed, that they are given certain unalienable rights, things that cannot be made foreign to their very persons, things that are irrefutable to the very nature of personhood, of being a human being, of being a man. Okay? Alienable rights. These are things that can't be stripped away by law. These are God-given rights. These are things that you're born with. And to violate them is to violate the very God-given creation. This is going back to fundamental metaphysics. This is going back to fundamental existential matters that mankind has always grappled with, that we grapple with today, that a lot of the things that we sense that are wrong violates these various things. That among these, meaning it's not limited to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I must say that Thomas Jefferson, good old Tommy Jefferson, Jefferson originally wrote Right of Property. Ben Franklin wisely advised against it. Now, the French Revolution, they went with that, and we see the problems in it. There's a whole slew of issues with property, and I am anti-property, and there's reasons I get into it. It's not the same as possessions. Property is an entirely different construct that you have to understand. Another video, another time. But life, again, if you do not have life, this is the foundational standpoint. You don't have life. If you don't have the respect and the protection of life, the security of life, the individual and then collectively, you have nothing. You cannot have a society, which is why you can't have wanton murder. You cannot have premeditated murder in a society. You can't have the violation of life, your safety things, sanctity, things like rape, child molestation, pedophilia, kidnapping. You cannot allow for certain things in a society. Without the protection of life, things like the Hippocratic Oath, protection in the value of life, liberty, individual freedoms, the ability to move freely in a society, not being dictated by what you should do, how you should shop, how you should eat, what you should do in all these aspects. That goes into individual things such as what I intake into my body, what I specifically do with my body, but also not to impact the freedoms of another person, okay? In the pursuit of happiness, people misconstrue this. It's not happiness, it's the pursuit, the equal opportunity, the pursuit of happiness. I am not limited to my means of how I can make a living, how I can, provide for my family, how I can have a social climbing, if you will, depends on your society, how I can, nothing is barring me. Alexander Hamilton is a fine example of that because of where he was from with the West Indies and more, and moved into New York and became, financially wealthy. Mobility, as some like to call it, right? The social mobility, that's what it's talking about. Also, I should be able, if I just want to be a farmer, if I just want to be an artisan, an artist, if I just want to be a thinker, a scientist, inventor, if I want to be a monk or a hermit, if I just want to be a family person, you should not be limited. If I want to practice my faith, if I want to do this, as long as it's not hurting other people, I should be able to do this. Again, anarchistic thought. Now it says governments are established to protect, and it goes on in there. But here's a key part about this. The last one, because I won't beleaguer the point for too long. I'll come to the conclusion really quickly. After a long train of usurpations and abuses have passed, is the obligation of the people, pretty much, to throw off that government and form a new one. Anarchistic thought to a T. This right here, for lack of a better term, for lack of anything else, go to that. After a long train. So this isn't just, we have some grievances. This isn't just, things aren't, just going on our favor, an election didn't go, blah, blah, blah. No, they're saying, listen, our people has suffered. You think of things in American history, you think of lynchings, you think of segregation, Jim Crow and more. You think of the ghettos that have been made, the hoods that have been made, the damn near genocide of the Native Americans / indigenous peoples. You can go into wage slavery. You can go into the struggles for labor rights. I can go into a laundry list of things done domestically and abroad, foreignly. After a long train of usurpations and abuses, after literally my freedoms time and time again have been taken away, questions of gun control and things of that manner, limiting on what the say of your vote, limiting on what the control I have, things such as the war on cannabis, the war on drugs, the war on this, the war on that, the war on the poor, the war on poverty, the war on this, like just the very nature of the system, making debt slaves, not being able to get lines of credit, not being able to rise economically, being forced into positions, being forced to take menial jobs, the dehumanization of people, and various things I can go on and on about that we know. Literally the invasion of privacy, literally Big Brother watching over you, RICO laws, and more that I can get into. The corruption, the bribery, all of these and more. Again, it's nearly exhaustive. We'll be here all day for me lifting off. Tuskegee experiments, anybody? MK Ultra, anybody? The CIA's very existence was extra governmental, anybody? Pumping various substances into the streets like fentanyl, crack, heroin, and more. Acid shouldn't have been as prevalent as it was in the 60s. Subversion, denial of things such as secession, which is a peaceful separation, which is constitutionally. I mentioned about you go to the Articles of Confederation, where each state was supposed to be autonomous unto itself. It was a confederation, a union, if you will. Even with the Constitutional Convention, and I'll do an entirely separate video on the 8 viewpoints of the Constitution that still ride to this day. You had the anti-ratifiers, the anti-rights. You had people don't study history. Go back to the Federalist Papers when they were literally arguing. Go back to the arguments and the debates of the Constitution. A lot of them are still had today. Part of the reason why you had the Civil War is because there was unresolved states' rights and more, individual rights, things we still debate to this very day because they were never solved. And I end up defending the Constitution, but I'm opposed to the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence is a far superior document to the vagueness of the nebulous nature of the Constitution. And even still, 95% of laws are unconstitutional and don't even go rock with the Constitution. Most people don't even read. They haven't read the Declaration of Independence. Okay? It's an anarchist document. And it shouldn't be a shocker if you actually read it. Because if you actually read the Declaration of Independence, and that's why I respect, for example, people who, who are gung-ho, Declaration of Independence, gung-ho about the Constitution. I respect y'all. I mean, who actually follow? I say libertarians don't go far enough, but those who actually about it, a lot of servicemen and service women, a lot of veterans. That's why I rock with them. That's why a lot of them are on the front lines of protesting more. That's why a lot of them do not agree. They might not go as far as my ideals, but we are more or less in line because it's the ideal freedom. At the end of the day, and then I'll wrap this video up, it's about freedom. And if you're about freedom and the cause of liberty, and if you've never listen to Patrick Henry, if you've never read his speech, go back and listen to it. The things he was saying back then are the same spirit and the same things I'm saying today. From 1775 to 2022, the call for liberty, the call for freedom has not changed. And at the end of the day, that is what anarchists are about. It's the respecter of freedom. Now, all the inner workings and all that, fine. We can address that. We can debate that. We can structure that. But if we ain't talking freedom, then we ain't talking nothing. If you're not talking freedom, you're talking slavery. And not this notion of enforcing, no, actual slavery. Chains. whether they be physical or invisible. If you, and one of the few good things FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, said, he talked about economic freedom. If you don't have economic freedom, you are not free. If you don't have political freedom, you are not free. If you don't have individual freedom, you are not free. If you don't have social freedom, you are not free. If you don't have cultural freedom, you are not free. If you don't have freedom of information, freedom of knowledge, freedom of personhood, if you are locked in a cage for something you didn't even do, you are not free. You cannot be in a free nation. If you cannot do what you do with your body, consumption of things, you are not free. Period. You can't have free interactions as long as you're not imposing and treading on someone. You see people with the rattlesnakes, don't tread on me. If it ain't about freedom, we ain't talking nothing at this point. The older I get, it's like that. If you're not part of the cause to help, then you are part of the problem. You are a hindrance. Just move out the way. If you don't want to be help in the cause, in a great cause of liberty and freedom, then get the hell out my way. Then get the hell out the way of people who want to work towards this actual goal. And I'll leave you off with that. Unexpected one to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me your thoughts on the matter. Tell me your thoughts on the Declaration of Independence. What is your interpretations? You may disagree with mine. That's fine. That is the nature of freedom. And we can hash it out in the comment section. If I gave you something differently to think about, if I gave you a different perspective, I'm glad. That was the entire point of this video. I'm not trying to change people's minds. I'm trying to get people to think of the original intent, yes, but think of it in a more applicable state status today. Because you can disagree with me on how you want to structure. That's fine. Like I said, each community should decide for itself. You should have freedom of association. And so maybe you don't agree with all the founding fathers' ideas. Neither do I. But I can glean from the principles that they laid out in a well-articulated, eloquent document and apply them and tweak them. It was of its era. How about we do things for ours? All right, y'all. Peace. Have a beautiful day, a beautiful night. Stay safe out there. And again, if we ain't about freedom, we doing nothing.